Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Gulsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science. Usually this thing's kind of like an unfolding lawn chair. It's just clunky. So, we'll see how this goes.
I think we know how it's going to go.
This is not our first rodeo? Is that what you're trying to say, Will?
I don't know. I mean, I guess the ones that it works for are still here listening to us, and the ones that it didn't work for have already moved on to something else. And
they've already bought a new lawn chair.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Or, but we're getting a little piggy today, so
yeah,
maybe we'll draw some of them back in.
Uh-oh. Well, I felt like our recent episode on coyotes has stimulated some interest.
Sure.
So we figured, why not just move right on to wild pigs?
Yeah. Do you think pigs are more or less hated than coyotes?
Oh, man. That's an excellent question. I think we should poll the audience on that.
Yeah, I think that's...
Which one's hated more? I'd have to say pigs from my perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree with that one. I feel like I always hear, I never hear anybody say anything good about coyotes, but, the bad stuff I hear about pigs is always way worse.
Yeah. Well, Matt, we appreciate you being here, and I think your last name's McDonough?
Yeah, McDonough, yeah.
McDonough. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't pronounce anybody's name right, so please don't be offended.
It's all right. I get it all the time.
Yeah. Well, we're really glad to have you here. And can you give us a little bit of your background? I know that your work has been on pigs and how they affect turkeys, but what else about you? What our audience like to know about you?
I'm originally from Syracuse, New York, and I applied for a position down at Auburn doing my master's with wild pigs and investigating, how wild pigs influence kind of our native species here in the Southeast. And specifically what we were looking at was deer and turkey. And, when you go in and you remove a bunch of pigs, what happens to everything else around there? And we had a couple other projects stem off, and I've since finished my master's, and I've been doing some pig research here and there, some other projects as I'm kind of stumbling along, trying to feel my way through the field,
Okay.
Yeah. So you stumbled your way into a PhD now, is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask. So have you moved into a PhD program now?
Actually, just started this semester, actually.
Oh, okay.
And you're doing that with Steve Ditchkoff, right? Mm-hmm. Still, and you also worked with Steve for your master's as well, right?
That's right. Yeah. I've kind of been working with him for the most part all throughout my time here at Auburn. So.
Mm-hmm.
So is your PhD work on pigs or deer or?
That's kind of up in the air. Yeah, it's probably be a mixture of whatever I can get my hands on. Honestly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I asked you beforehand, but I wanted to ask you now so the audience can hear your answer. So are you a pig guy or a turkey guy?
I'd say I'm definitely a pig guy.
Yeah. I'll tell you what.
That's fine, man. Somebody's got to be a pig guy, and if there's going to be one, Matt's a killer. So
that's right.
I'm glad to have him on our team in that regard.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, we need all types.
That's right.
So I won't hold it against you. Hey,
don't be wrong. I like turkeys too.
Yeah. I'm about having more turkeys, and if that means having less pigs, then I'm about that too.
Kind of works out that way, huh?
I think you're going to tell us, aren't you?
That's right.
So one of the things that I wanted to start out with, Matt, is kind of laying the groundwork for going into your the specifics of your study, and setting it up. I mean, it was a very strong experimental design. That was one of the things that first struck me when I started reading through the paper. But it was a before after control impact design, right?
That's right. Yeah. So we had 3 treatment sites and 1 control site, and they were all very, very close to each other. Kind of in a little square down in south central Alabama. And what we did was we went out before we ever did anything. We ran some camera surveys, and kind of established like a baseline of like, okay, this is what our turkey populations look like on each of these individual sites and overall. And then we went in and we were working with USDA Wildlife Services and removed a lot of pigs. We ended up removing like close to 1,900 pigs over the course of this study. And the whole time we were doing this, as we were progressing, we were doing camera surveys where we were looking at the turkey populations and how, where we were in that removal relative to the baseline, and how that was like how the turkey populations were changing in the response to that on the treatment sites. But the whole time we were leaving the control alone and kind of just letting it do what it does to control for any annual variation that you get with reproduction or just in general, and just using all that to we compare that in a model and see how everything was shaping out really.
Yeah.
So Matt, let me ask you a couple questions about that. One, can you kind of describe how many years of data on either side?
So
did you have?
So we started off. We had 1 year of baseline data, and then we did 2 years while we were actively removing pigs on the treatment sites. And what we did was we did a survey in the summer where we were specifically like trying to target poults. And as I'm sure you guys know how difficult that can be to get on camera.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then we were doing another spring survey that was a pre-hunting season survey to get an estimate in the spring before harvest, and any rapid changes in population coming from that, just specifically in regards to the males being harvested. Yeah. And we had 2 camera surveys on each site prior to our beginning of the removals, and then we just did that annually. And so then these camera surveys were done for a week after a week of pre-baiting. So we went out and we were keeping bait on the ground the whole time, just so that like turkeys and everything else was getting used to feeding in those areas before we even put the camera out. And what that did was that kind of made it easier that was an established feeding area for these turkeys, and it was easier to get them coming back, and there was a way to kind of make them more detectable.
I got you. So how large were the areas?
So there were, I think in total it was like 40-something thousand acres, of which about 35 was the treatment sites and 5 was the control site. So
okay.
So yeah,
10,000 acre plus.
Sorry. Yeah, I have down from the methods that the smallest site was like 7,500 acres. So these are pretty large areas.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I figured they were pretty large because you said there was almost 2,000 pigs removed or something like that, 1,900. So in those, were you using the camera surveys also to measure relative abundance of pigs in some way?
So,
or how were you determining the effect size of your treatment, I guess?
So what we did was we kind of we just before we started our removals, we ran a very intensive survey, and we actually ended up going in and individually identifying each pig that we were getting on the camera survey. And what we were doing was we had these cameras spaced in a way that it was smaller than a home range, so we were able to pick up the same pigs on different cameras. And what that allowed us to do was establish 2 things. A, it was giving us a minimum census, where it was an assumed census where, this is the absolute, we at least know that there are these many pigs on each site, and they were, we could compare to each other and say this is the density on this site relative to this site relative to this site. But in addition to this, in terms of our removals, what that helped us do was say, okay, we know this group of pigs is using this area, and we can go in and target them and make sure that we remove this group of pigs from that area. And so it gave us a more selective and scientific approach to going in and removing these sounders of pigs from these areas to try to create, little pig-free pockets.
Mm-hmm.
So
one of the things that I was curious about, Matt, is where would you say that those study areas rank in terms of like pig density
That's where I was going
compared to, like maybe the average across the Southeast? Are we talking about, is this a high density area, pretty average, somewhere in between, or who knows?
So we had our control site was about average for the Southeast, as well as one of our other treatment sites. And then we had, that's normally about 9 pigs per square kilometer. And we had another one that was slightly lower at 6 pigs per square kilometer. And then our third treatment site was close to double that, and it was about 16 pigs per square kilometer is what we estimated it at. So this one was just swamped with pigs.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wait, so the one that was had a pile of them, how many was that? What was the density?
The density was 16 pigs per square kilometer.
All right. How many Alabamas is that? What is that per square mile? Like 2.4 times?
Yeah,
16?
so that would be like 30, 35-ish per square mile.
Yeah. That's a decent deer density.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a lot of pigs.
That's a pile of them.
I guess some of them are little, right?
Yeah. We were counting them all, the little ones, big ones, all of that. So
yeah,
eventually they're going to be the big ones.
yeah. Weird how that works out, isn't it?
Yeah. The other thing that I think I'm curious about, and I know a lot of our listeners would be too, is the removal techniques that y'all are using.
Yeah, so we were using, we did a mixture of remote traps where we were using the phone activated, where you had a camera up and you could watch them all go in and actually manually drop the trap. And those were very nice for the whole sound. We were doing whole sounder removal.
Sure.
So it was very nice for that because you're actively looking at what's going in there, and you're able to just say, okay, they're all in there, and drop this trap.
Mm-hmm.
The downside to that is that that's normally happening at about 3 a.m. So you're always having to, you're having to pattern them, set an alarm, and wake up to get that. So while it's very beneficial and a very clean way to do it, it's tough if you don't have the people willing to do it or the manpower to do it.
Right.
And then we didn't have cell service in all the areas we were doing, actually most of it. So the way we got around that was we were using guillotine doors in cattle panel traps. And we would set them on a trip line. We had the trip line in a way that we could adjust it to the height of the biggest pig in the air in the sounder. So there's been studies that have been done where, not all the time, but for the most part, that biggest pig is usually the matriarch. It's usually the last one to go in. Because in terms of like feeding costs and costs associated with feeding and everything. So the little ones get to go in and they can run around underneath the trip line without setting it off and keep feeding. And then once that big one's like, okay, it's good enough to go in, they set it off and traps the group. And so we were doing that. And then in addition to that, we had wildlife services come out, and they were doing some aerial removals where they were taking the helicopter out and they were, flying over these sites, and they were finding pigs and taking them out. And that really helped benefit our removals, especially on some of the sites where the densities were really high, and it was, they'd flush them out of these tall grass areas, and they were able to do a good job with that, I think.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that most of them were removed via trapping? And then, like, how does it break down in terms of the relative proportion between techniques?
So I would say it was probably...
And if I may get down too far in the weeds on some of this, if so...
You're good. I'm just, trying to do some mental math here. I would say probably...
That's one of the things that we're known for.
Yeah, it's getting too far down in the weeds.
No, for doing mental math.
Oh, the math. That's I would say probably about like 80 to 85% were removed from trapping, and only a handful from helicopter. And part of it is that where we are in Alabama, there's so many tall trees around and heavily forested canopies that you can't get the same results you can in areas like Texas, where there's a lot more open. They're running them through plains. They can really get on them, or like low shrubs, and it's easier to get on them and stay on them. Whereas here, once they get into those tall trees, it's like you can't see them, you can't get in, you can't get down on them and everything. So it's harder in this kind of landscape that we were doing it in to use that helicopter.
Sure.
So it's entirely dependent. Like the efficacy is entirely dependent on the area that you're in. So
yeah, Well, one of the things that we always like to do, and the reason I asked that question is we try to put the like results from any study that we discussed within the context, so that a landowner could understand, what the realistic expectation takeaways are, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that came to mind for me is these were, you had a minimum 7,500 acre trapped area. Most landowners are going to be much smaller than that, so their ability to control a population is going to be less than it would be if it was a larger property. And again, like we talk about this every time, I'm not trying to discourage folks. I'm just trying to give you realistic
Yeah.
expectations.
Yeah.
But it sounds like with the trapping that, if y'all were removing 85% of them with corral traps, and particularly with the tripwires and not, always using the remotely activated gates, then that's something that would be achievable by the landowner.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot more accessible, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of it goes into how you do it too. Habituate, like finding areas where there's, identifying what pigs are out there, finding the areas they're using, and habituation to the trap is, I think, the biggest thing that is going to benefit landowners looking to remove the pigs. You got to monitor it, make sure that they're all comfortable going in, because they'll learn if you trap a small group, you'll make that bit that wasn't that sow or whatever part of that group wasn't trapped. They'll get a lot more, I guess, spooky around these traps if they watch the door drop and they have that negative experience. So kind of getting them all comfortable in the trap before it's set is a big part of a successful trapping program, I think.
Yeah. And I guess even if you don't have cell signal, you can do that with a standard trail camera.
Exactly.
You have to go back out there to bait anyway, so you could pull your SD card and figure out, when the sounder tends to be getting comfortable with the trap and going in at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
So, in the interest of providing context as well, I think Will and I did this on a different episode, like related to trapping nest predators or something. So and correct my memory if I'm wrong, but you removed 1,900 pigs or so, didn't you say?
Yeah, roughly, yeah.
And that was about 30,000 acres collectively.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that, like a pig per 15 acres or something like that?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Is that right, Will, or why are you laughing at me?
Just you trying to do math like that on the fly. I mean, more power to you, buddy.
Yeah, so I think that's important for context because you're kind of expressing the density of pigs that you're removing, right?
Yeah.
And people can kind of scale that to what they're operating with. So maybe they only have 1,000 acres, and that's the number of pigs, I guess, over a 2-year period. So,
yeah. One thing to keep in mind about it too, though, is that the way that pigs use the landscape is they're not always like evenly distributed because of how they're socially structured. So like that density isn't like, oh, there's a pig here, here, and here. It's like there's 20 pigs here, all grouped together in one sounder, and they're moving through the area, and they have a core area and their territory, and they're because of how they interact with other groups, they usually carve these little pockets out for themselves, and so you're not getting. They have the areas they like, and they'll stray from those areas, but they kind of tend to really be tightly packed in certain areas. So
Matt, can you just take, and you don't have to go into extreme detail, but I've gotten curious enough from some of the things that you've said to try to get you to walk us through for our listeners. Like if you're stepping foot on a property that has a pig problem for the first time, how are you going to approach that problem?
So the first thing I'm going to do is, before I even put any traps out or anything, is I'm going to go out there and if it's a big enough property, well, in general, normally what I'll do is I'll put out cameras with baits, and I space them, about one every two per square mile, I guess, would be 2 cameras per square mile or so. Probably a little bit denser, I guess. I was trying to do the mental conversion in my head.
It's dangerous.
Yeah, that's right. And I'll put bait. I'll put bait out for. I'll do a week of pre-baiting where I'm just putting bait out, getting everything in, because pigs, once they find a bait pile, I'm sure a lot of people know this, unfortunately, is they'll just keep coming back to that food source. And so once they get that established as a food source, kind of similar to what I was talking about with how we did the turkey surveys, is you can then put the camera up, and I mean sometimes they'll be there a couple times a day, just the same group, and you'll really get to see like, okay, this group is, this is who's here, this is what we have on the property, this is where they're using, where they like to use, like if they're using multiple cameras, like which one do they come to more, kind of thing. And then again, what that kind of gives you is a list of like, okay, these are who's where and who's associated with who, so that you can go out and make sure that you're really targeting those whole groups and not leaving a sow there that, you know, is going to hang around and reproduce and just kind of start a new group but be harder to trap. And so after that, what and also with that is that you'll also establish a feeding area that you can then set a trap on. So then you can start building, usually you try to do it slowly, is start building that trap around the pigs as we're baiting, get them feeding up next to it or crossing the threshold of the door, because we found that the threshold is really a big, it kind of discourages some of these pigs a little bit. But once you can get them feeding through that threshold, you know, you can kind of start building a trap up around them and make sure that they're all comfortable feeding in. And you know, sometimes they all go right in, sometimes they take a little time. And once they're comfortable with that, you can, you know, set the trap. You're watching on your phone and drop the trap once they're all comfortable going in there, and kind of remove them all in one go. And the biggest thing that we found, because we removed a lot more, ended up by the end of the 22 months, we removed a lot more pigs than we actually estimated at first. And a lot of that was because we were doing this over, you know, 2 years. And so you're getting a lot of reproduction. You get some of these younger sounders that split off, and you know, they go searching for they go searching to establish newer territories. And so you really need to monitor after you remove those pigs, because you may be pig free for, you know, a couple months, a year, but eventually, like if there's pigs all around you, at some point they're going to filter into that area again. So you kind of got to really monitor and stay on top of it. And also, I guess working with your neighbors is a good way to go about it too.
Absolutely.
The more people you can get on board, the easier it is to manage that.
Yeah. And so are you building those corral traps out of like the welded wire fence panels or something different?
Yeah. So we didn't actually end up building those. Those were provided by Wildlife Services, and it's kind of just a thin wire, or not a thin wire, a welded wire to a like big metal steel frame.
Yeah.
And we were using metal doors with just plywood or metal gates with plywood drop doors on them. And that worked out pretty well. It was rigid enough that it could hold them. And we were using the Jaeger Pro systems back for our cellular stuff, so we were using that whole there. I think they have aluminum panels and the big 8-foot doors, and those work really well too. But I think that welded wire with the frame was really structurally sound. But you can do the same thing with just flexible cattle panels and some T-posts too. It's gonna have the same effect. So
okay.
So Matt, when you were doing the camera surveys, presumably you're getting pigs on those, right? Did you look at the detection rate or something with the cameras before and after the removals? Like, can you give us a sense of how much the removal, like what was the effect it had on the pig population?
So there was definitely some ebb and flow, and depending on how depending on how and where we were looking. So on our surveys, there were some areas, you know, we'd go in and we'd remove or remove a group of pigs, and we wouldn't see pigs again for a year. And there were other areas where it seemed like it was constant. You know, we'd remove a group, and then a couple weeks later, there's another group there. And so it was really kind of dependent on how far it was from the border and the habitat type as to how quickly they were coming in. But there's always this period of time after where we wouldn't see anything. It's like we plucked that group out, and it created this little vacuum of no pigs. And we were kind of plucking these groups out and creating these little vacuums, or these little pockets where we weren't having any pigs for a certain amount of time. But it's tough to say how long that period of time is on the landscape. So.
Okay. Well, should we talk about how it affected turkeys?
Yeah, the big reveal, right?
Yeah, that's right.
We've been going on for
jump right into it, Matt.
20 minutes without telling people what happened.
Kind of alluded to it earlier a little bit. So we ended up finding that as we were removing these pigs and creating those little pockets where we weren't having pigs for a while, we were finding that not only were we seeing more turkeys, but they were more comfortable feeding at these bait sites. So these bait sites were kind of a proxy. They're an area where there's a bunch of food in a little space, kind of similar to a feeder or an oak tree or any of those like spatially limited feeding sites. And so you can kind of think of that as a proxy. And we kind of found that they were coming to the cameras in the first place more, but even better was that they were continually coming back more. And it was a more common occurrence that they were going to show up and like come back the next day and the next day and the next day as we were removing these pigs. And so we saw our detection actually doubled. So the way we measured our wild pig removal was we compared how many pigs we removed at the time of a survey to the baseline and kind of did that as a relative measure of the pig removal.
So if you had like 100 pigs pre and you removed 80, you would say it was an 80% reduction.
So it's not a true, because there's reproduction happening and all that. Sure. So it's not like a true. It's hard to track that throughout time. Right. With what we had in the area we were covering. So we were using that as kind of like an index to say, okay, well, while we remove, there's areas like on the site where there's 9 pigs per square kilometer. If we get rid of 100 pigs on there, it's going to have a different effect than on the area where there's 16 pigs per square kilometer. So it was kind of like a way to standardize the removal to the prior densities on these sites to be able to say, okay, well, there's more. This is how much of an effect we were having, how successful our management was on this site versus this site. And so what we were finding was that when we were removing the same number, like when our removals got to the point where we had removed the same amount of pigs that we estimated the baseline, our detection for turkeys actually doubled on these camera sites. And as you started removing more and it was like a more longer term, more intense management, it just got higher and higher and higher. But that was the way we thought about it was, if we had 100 pigs, once we got to the point where we removed 100 pigs, we were seeing that turkeys, they were twice as detectable on camera on these bait sites.
And y'all actually looked at poults specifically as well, right?
Yeah. So with poults, what we saw was we started our removals in March. So, getting into it and all that, the time frame of it really wouldn't have had an effect on that first year. So the nesting season that first year is kind of. It was a tough time to start with that, but what we found was that actually in our second year we started seeing that we were seeing poults in more areas than we were prior. So we had poults on our control site, but we didn't have any detections on our treatment sites even during the baseline until the second year after we started removals. And kind of what we are thinking and what some other research has shown that's come out since is that it's really these adults selecting for moving into these areas and selecting for these areas and nesting, and it's not the jury's not really out on the nest depredation as much as as what we think it is these turkeys coming into these nesting areas and being like, oh, this is a better nesting habitat because I'm not getting disturbed by pigs. Or whether they're getting pushed out or whether they're just selecting for less pressure in that way. We're kind of thinking it's the adults moving in and setting up nests rather than nest survival or anything of that sort.
So in other words, you think turkeys just don't like to nest where there are pigs, not that when there were a bunch of pigs, they were eating all the nests.
Yeah, because there have been studies that have been done that looked at a bunch of stuff with artificial nests and then true turkey nests, and the stuff with the true turkey nests. There's years where they get absolutely hammered, and there's then the other years where it's not so much. So it's kind of it seems like it's not really clear in that regard as to how that, how that's shaping out.
Mm-hmm.
And so but what we've kind of hypothesized with that, it's more so adults being like, okay, this is a better area now because we're, this disturbance is being managed more,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah, God, there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, right,
I feel
yeah.
like and
Yeah.
dive into. But as a scientist, of course, I want to understand that mechanism and have more clarity on, is it a behavioral response? Like, are they just behaviorally excluding turkeys from that area? Or is it maybe a combination of that with the numerical effects or the direct effects? But then as a land manager, I'm just like, I don't care.
I
Like,
want
if
more
fewer
turkeys.
pigs equals more turkeys, I don't care how it gets there. I know I need fewer pigs.
So that was kind of what this research was, we didn't get down and dirty with like how things were happening. It was more so like, you hear about all these things. You hear about nest depredation. You hear about aggressive exclusion and resource competition. And it's like, in general, like, does this interaction actually matter? Or is it just kind of something that like, oh, like you see like a pig eats a nest and it's not really doing anything, or these turkeys were like, I'm getting out of this food plot because the pigs came in. Like, we were just looking like overall, doesn't matter kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of, just instead of just diving in and being like, oh, well, it's this or this or this, it's just in general, is there an effect at all?
So, Matt, when you were speaking a few minutes ago, did I hear you say that there's some work forthcoming about real hen nests and depredation of pigs on those nests? Or
so we weren't really looking at we've since done some research, and some of the other grad students have done some research, and it wasn't necessarily nest stuff that we were looking at. Specifically, we were looking at turkey movements in relation to pig management. Okay. And so there was some, GPS, we were putting GPS units on these turkeys and watching where they're moved as we were removing pigs, and looking at like pig density relative to turkey movements. And we were finding that these turkeys were selecting for like their daytime use was increasing in areas where pigs were like there was a lower density of pigs. And they were selecting to roost in these areas where there was a lower density of pigs, and they were nesting in areas where there was lower densities of pigs, and they were they were kind of more comfortable in general in these areas where there were less pigs. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of lend itself to sort of the mechanism we were talking about with it's the movement and the distribution of adults on the landscape in relation to these pig densities and how you're managing these pigs and everything.
Yeah. Oh, Will, maybe you would know, but are there any studies that have shown on real hen nests that pig depredation is any significant proportion? Do you guys know?
I'm trying to recall. I think it's been documented, but I can't ever remember a study saying that pigs were responsible for the majority of it.
Yeah,
I don't even remember one where it was a significant proportion. I know that they've been documented on some of the simulated nest studies.
Yeah.
There's been a couple of times where it was relatively high on the simulated nests. But,
and it gives me pause, but,
yeah,
we really don't know yet, because a lot of those real nest studies don't show the same. So
well, we definitely have tracked nests in places where there are pigs.
Sure.
Like, for example, in the Florida study, we have 2 years of data now on 2 sites. One of them has particularly many. I don't know what the density is to give you a comparison to what you were dealing with, Matt, but there are a lot of pigs around. And I don't think we've had a nest that we suspect was pig-related, loss.
Mm-hmm.
So that I guess I was bringing that up just to provide some additional anecdotal evidence that, I think that data would probably be present because there's been quite a few nests in places where there are lots of pigs.
Mm-hmm.
We'd probably know that it was a significant proportion of the nest loss if it was.
Mm-hmm.
I bring that up just to provide some additional support, I guess, that maybe this is a behavioral mechanism. Maybe turkeys just don't like pigs, so they try to keep their distance from them. It's a behavioral
Yeah.
exclusion rather than some direct impact on their reproduction.
Yeah. I've talked with a lot of folks about this, and some of them will get quite argumentative with you about the predation component of it. But let me be clear, I'm not saying that I'm not concerned about, pigs when it comes to turkeys. It's just that, I think more about it from the behavioral exclusion, the resource competition, the exclusion from food resources. All of those things add up to enough for me. And you add on to that, like it diminishes your ability to do certain land management practices when there's lots of pigs, like particularly growing anything that has a grain or a root that is preferred by,
Yeah, I was gonna
pigs.
say.
And so you add all that up, and that's, sufficient justification for me to go scorched earth on them regardless.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody out there is probably in the same boat. If a pig finds a turkey nest, it will eat it.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
the data, I haven't seen any compelling evidence that they're eating a lot of them. But it sounds like your data, Matt, is pretty strong, suggesting that they are avoiding being around them.
Yeah, and that's kind of where it's fallen right now. Like I say, it's like we talked about. There hasn't been a ton of evidence that they're just hounding nests or anything of the sort. But we have kind of seen evidence that there's a behavioral change going on there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I've gotten to see some of that data that Matt was alluding to earlier, and that was Travis Stokely's master's project, and he's right. I mean, you look at the density of pigs across the site based on their camera surveys, and you look at turkey movements, based on GPS data relative to it, and I mean, it's kind of like there's holes in areas that turkeys just won't go because there are pigs there. So you think about it from a landowner's perspective. That really hurts because there's
You don't want it to be your property.
Yeah, there's entire acres of your property that turkeys may consider unusable just because of the presence of pigs.
Yeah, it may be your whole property. I mean, seriously.
Yeah, you may be one of those little pockets in there.
It may depend on the feeder density on your property.
That too.
I knew we were getting there. I knew it. Well, I was just about to say, if you've got a feeder out that pigs are hammering, you've just created a void in space used by turkeys.
Oh yeah.
And to be clear, I would guess it is possible to photograph, because I'm sure there's a landowner somewhere screaming at us right now saying, I've got a feeder that I get pig and turkey pictures on. And it's not to say that that's not still possible. It's just that you would probably have more turkey visitation if the pigs weren't there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those where it's rare. It's probably gonna happen. I almost guarantee you. So, like you said, someone somewhere's got pictures of it, and it's not to say that this is a hard and fast rule. Like they're never gonna be near each other, but in general, on average, I guess they're probably not wanting to be around each other. Or
Right.
well, turkeys aren't wanting to be around pigs, so to speak.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I think that there's been a similar effect demonstrated for deer and pigs.
So yeah, I'm on another aspect of what I did was I looked at the same kind of similar structured study, but looking at deer with camera surveys.
Okay.
And we didn't really see much of a population change, so to speak.
Right.
But we were seeing that camera visitation and repeat visitation of deer was way higher as we were removing these pigs.
Right.
So our detection was going up, and it was so as we were getting rid of these pigs, these deer were just like, okay, let's go to these feeding areas. This is a good spot to be. We're not getting messed with. We don't have to deal with these pigs. Let's just keep going back there, because this is kind of nice.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like it's pretty safe to say that, your game species generally are trying to stay away from pigs.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Is there anything else that you could think of that a landowner could do to potentially, mitigate pig damage or reduce abundance on their property?
Like I said, obviously trapping and is the biggest way to do it. Working with the people around you is really important in that regard, because the more people you can get involved, the easier it's going to be to manage that landscape to mitigate that damage. Short of putting a fence around your whole place, though, it's tough to do, honestly.
Yeah. And did y'all see an effect? Because I know some landowners might be hearing this and thinking, well, I live 3 hours from my property. There's no way I could remove 100% of the pigs. Did you see a positive impact with some removal?
Yeah, we did. I'd say any removal really helps. Like I said, when you start doing these if you can get the whole sounder at once, you can kind of create, like I said, these pockets where it's okay. You get, a few months here, there, in this area where you're not, you may get a boar rolling through, but there's not really anything holding up and kind of affecting that area for a while. And you can do it in a way where you can create these little pockets where you're at least extremely lowering the pig density, if not completely getting rid of it in an area, because of how they are territorial and how they use their home ranges. So any little bit really can help, but I'd really just focus on, if you're gonna do it, don't go in haphazardly. If you take care of the whole group all at once and make that area a little bit nicer for a while.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Down with the pig.
That's right.
You got anything else, Marcus?
Well, I can't think of anything else. I think we pretty well covered that study. Is there anything else, Matt, that you think we should have asked you, or anything, for a take-home message?
I think you guys about covered it honestly with some good questions you guys are throwing at me.
Well, I'm sure we missed a lot.
Yeah,
interrogation, really. Huh?
You felt like you were back in your defense. It hasn't been that long ago.
That's right.
Yeah, well, you're polished. So
been working on it.
Yeah, well, we really appreciate you coming and doing this. Hopefully it didn't feel like an interrogation, but we always like to share the research. I know you just got this published recently, so we'll link that in the show notes and give people access to it. And otherwise, thanks for coming. Thanks everybody out there for listening. We really appreciate all the support and the feedback. And this is another one of those, Will, that comes up pretty commonly.
Yeah.
People want to know about pigs, and I think a lot of that's coming from their spreading, and a lot of people have pig problems.
Right.
So they want to know what's going on, and I think you addressed that pretty well, Matt.
Awesome. I appreciate you guys having me on to talk about it. It's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your time, Matt. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.